Thousands of South Korean doctors protested on Sunday, March 3, in Seoul in an escalating standoff with the government over medical training reforms, which has seen junior doctors quit en masse, plunging hospitals into chaos. Around 10,000 junior doctors quit and stopped working nearly 2 weeks ago to protest hikes to medical school admissions from next year meant to combat shortages and an aging society. The striking professionals have defied a February 29 government deadline for them to return to work or face legal action, including possible arrests or suspensions of their medical licenses. The protesters wore black masks and waved signs saying, "We oppose the medical school admissions increase." The government is pushing the reforms unilaterally and that the doctors cannot accept under any circumstances, Kim Taek-woo of the Korea Medical Association told the crowd of protesters. The government is very aware of the reasons why all doctors are opposing the increase in the medical school admissions, but are exploiting policies to turn doctors into slaves forever. The mass work stoppage has taken a toll on hospitals, with crucial treatments and surgeries cancelled, prompting the government to raise its public health alert to the highest level. Around half of the surgeries scheduled at some major hospitals have been cancelled since last week, according to the health ministry. Under South Korean law, doctors are restricted from striking, and the government this week requested police investigate people connected to the stoppage. While the return to work deadline has passed, the government would still exercise utmost leniency for trainee doctors if they return to work by the end of today, Interior Minister Lee Sang-minit said on Sunday in a KBS television interview. But if they don't come back by today, the government will have no choice but to act sternly in accordance with laws and principles. Lee reiterated the government's commitment to its reform plans, saying even the 65% increase in medical admissions isn't that large, considering the importance of the healthcare sector. South Korea's government is pushing to admit 2,000 more students to medical schools annually from next year to address what it calls one of the lowest doctor-to-population ratios among developed nations. Doctors fear the reform will erode the quality of service and medical education, but proponents accuse them of trying to safeguard their salaries and social status. Polling shows up to 75% of the public support the reforms. President Yoon Suk-yeol has taken a hard line on the striking doctors and has seen his approval ratings tick up as the standoff drags on. With legislative elections in April and Yoon's party looking to win back a parliamentary majority, the government is unlikely to compromise quickly, analysts said. But doctors have also vowed not to back down, saying the government's plan did not address the sector's real problems. "We have nowhere to retreat anymore. We will not just sit idly by the government acting undemocratic," Lee Jong-gun, interim head of the KMA, said at Sunday's protest.
North Korea's hacking groups have broken into at least 2 South Korean manufacturers of chip-making equipment, as Pyongyang looks to evade sanctions and turn out its own semiconductors for weapons programs, South Korea's spy agency said on March 4. The news comes after South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol warned that North Korea could stage provocations, such as cyber attacks or spreading fake news, to interfere in April's parliamentary elections. The National Intelligence Service, NIS, said the South Korean firms had been a key target of North Korean hackers since late in 2023, and called for tougher security. North Korea penetrated the servers of 2 companies in December and February, stealing product design drawings and photographs of their facilities, the NIS said. "We believe that North Korea might possibly be preparing to produce its own semiconductors in the face of difficulties in procuring them due to sanctions," it said in a statement. Also driving the North's efforts could be higher demand from its satellite, missile, and other weapons programs, it added. Pyongyang has always denied involvement in cybercrimes, although North Korea has been blamed for cyber attacks netting millions of dollars. The hackers employed a technique called living off the land, which minimizes malicious codes and uses existing, legitimate tools installed within the servers, making it difficult to detect with security software, the NIS said. Osaka Prefecture is considering collecting a fixed fee from foreign visitors, possibly timing it around the start of the World Exposition in Western Japan in April 2025, its governor said on Wednesday 6. The fee would be used to fund over-tourism countermeasures. Currently, there is no taxation scheme introduced by local governments in Japan specifically targeting foreigners, according to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communication. The ministry said it needs to gain the consent of the Internal Affairs Minister to establish such a system, the details for which have yet to be worked out. The prefectural government also needs to clear some hurdles to introduce the scheme, such as making sure the levy system is consistent with the country's tax conventions. We want foreign visitors to enjoy Osaka and try to realize a coexistence with local residents through the beautification of towns, Osaka Governor Hirofumi Yoshimura told reporters. The prefectural government plans to launch a panel to discuss the matter in April. The prefecture currently levies an accommodation tax of 100 to 300 yen on room fees of 7,000 yen or more per night, whether the guests are Japanese or foreign nationals. Yoshimura suggested the proposed amount of the fixed fee around the same. Since the Osaka prefectural and city governments plan to open a so-called integrated resort featuring casinos in 2030 on Umeshima, an artificial island in the Osaka Bay and the venue for the 2025 Expo, the prefecture needs measures to mitigate the impact of over-tourism, according to Yoshimura.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi sends message to U.S., the world and domestic audience that China is very strong during press briefing, analyst says. The two powers are expected to continue keeping tensions in check, even with possible complications brought by this year's U.S. elections. Problems and mistrust still stand in the way of warmer ties between China and the U.S., analysts said, after stern remarks from Foreign Minister Wang Yi, including that Washington was obsessed with suppressing Beijing. Speaking at a press conference on the sidelines of the National People's Congress, China's top diplomat noted there had been some improvements in relations with the U.S. after a summit between leaders Xi Jinping and Joe Biden last year. But he said Washington's misperception towards China continues and U.S. promises are not truly fulfilled. The U.S. has been devising various tactics to suppress China and kept lengthening its unilateral sanctions list, reaching bewildering levels of unfathomable absurdity. Washington has in recent months pushed ahead with technology-related restrictions on China and sanctioned Chinese firms said to have aided Russia's war in Ukraine. U.S. curbs on China's artificial intelligence hopes. In a reference to U.S. curbs on China's artificial intelligence sector, Wang said attempts to create a small yard-high fence in AI would result in mistakes with historical consequences. That phrase was used by U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan last year when talking about measures to protect Washington's technologies, including placing restrictions on advanced semiconductor technology exports to China. Wang Yiwei, a professor of international relations at Renmin University in Beijing, said the Chinese foreign minister's remarks indicated that while the Xi-Biden meeting had eased tensions to some extent, there are still some problems and Beijing was dissatisfied with the outcomes. But he said even amid the suppression, Wang Yi also appeared to be trying to dispel the narrative that China was a threat and to push for greater cooperation with American business. It is a direct appeal to the U.S., hoping that Washington can maintain good and healthy cooperation with Beijing, he said. If there is competition, it should be healthy competition. Alfred Wu, an associate professor at the National University of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, said it could also have been an attempt to get the U.S. to revisit, or possibly lift, its tech restrictions, though that was unlikely to happen. He expected Washington and Beijing to continue keeping tensions in check, even with possible complications brought by this year's U.S. elections. U.S. sanctions have restricted Chinese access to key tools such as advanced graphics processing units from NVIDIA, the world's leading AI chip designer. China's AI industry, seen as a strong rival to that of the U.S., is increasingly anxious about the gap with American competitors after the launch of OpenAI's Sora and ChatGPT. Beijing is meanwhile pushing for self-reliance in science and technology to counter U.S. moves to block China's access to cutting-edge tech, as well as to transform the sluggish economy. On Thursday, Wang Yi appeared to be reviewing ties with the U.S. in the months since Xi and Biden met in San Francisco in November, talks that came as the two powers were seeking to improve relations. Since then, military-to-military communication has been restored. If the U.S. says one thing and does another, where is its credibility as a major country? If it gets jittery whenever it hears the word China, where is its confidence as a major country? Wang said, if it only wants itself to prosper but denies other countries legitimate development, where is international fairness? If it persistently monopolizes the high end of the value chain and keeps China at the low end, where is fairness and competition? He added, the challenge for the U.S. comes from itself, not from China. If the U.S. is obsessed with suppressing China, it will eventually harm itself. Of the 21 questions that Wang fielded, only one was on the U.S., but he appeared to take multiple swipes at Washington's actions on regional and global issues throughout the press conference. China's role in the Israel-Gaza and Ukraine-Russia wars. One of those was in response to a question on the Israel-Gaza war. Wang called for an immediate ceasefire and said Beijing backed the Palestinian Authority in becoming a full UN member, but he urged individual UN Security Council permanent members to stop erecting obstacles. The US, one of 5 permanent members alongside China, has long used its veto powers to block actions that Israel did not support, including recent UN resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Asked by Indonesian media about the South China Sea, Wang urged certain countries outside the region not to make provocations, or stir up trouble and problems in the disputed waters. Beijing had repeatedly accused Washington of adding fuel to disputes in the region and undermining stability amid heightened tensions in the resource-rich waterway that China claims almost entirely. Responding to a separate question on multipolarity, Wang also took aim at U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's earlier comment that if you're not at the table in the international system, you're going to be on the menu. The foreign minister said China believed in a multipolar world with equal opportunities, and that it was definitely unacceptable that certain countries must be at the table while some others can only be on the menu. Wu from the News also pointed out that Wang used parts of his briefing, both directly and indirectly, to single out Washington's actions in global conflicts and pinpoint U.S. problems in international relations. He said that reflected how China viewed the U.S. as its key competitor on global matters, and was also an effort to highlight Beijing's role as a peacemaker in the unfolding conflicts in the Middle East and Europe. Following its diplomatic success in brokering a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia a year ago, China has sought to portray itself as a mediator. It has sent Special Envoy Li Hui on a second European tour this week, in hopes of playing a bigger role in the Ukraine war. It's a message to the US and the world, but it is also an important message to the domestic audience that China is very strong, that they are not compromising with the US, Wu said. But even as Wang tried to send a strong message to the US on Thursday, he also stressed that the world's 2 largest economies needed to coexist. He said US-China ties were critical to the well-being of the 2 peoples and to the future of humanity, and that Beijing approached the relationship with a sense of responsibility. Peaceful coexistence is the baseline because conflict and confrontation between 2 major countries like China and the US will have unimaginable consequences, he said. Win-win cooperation is the goal. When working together, China and the US can do great things conducive to the 2 countries and the world.